You're listening to the Product Coalition podcast with Jay Stansel. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition podcast. Let's go.
Welcome back, everyone. My guest today is Matthew Wensing. Matt is the VP of Product and Design at Customer.io. That's a company that just crossed 100 million in ARR, and he's still accelerating. Now, before that, he spent 2 decades as a founder, building companies from scratch, including Summit, a financial forecasting platform for bootstrapped startups. Now, here's why today's conversation is going to matter. Matt made a rare transition. He went from being the person who makes every product call to being the person who builds the system that makes those calls without him being in the room. Now, that shift from founder instinct to organizational product judgment is something most product leaders never figure out too cleanly. So we're going to dig into 3 specific threads today with Matt. First, what Matt had to unlearn about product decision making when he stopped being the founder. Second, how you preserve product taste and quality standards at a $100 million ARR company, but without becoming the bottleneck. And third, how he has integrated AI into the product organization in a way that actually scales, not as a gimmick, but as a genuine operating layer across the product teams. Matt, really excited for today's session. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Jay. It's good to be here.
Now, Matt, we're going to be talking about unpicking some of that founder essence that's been part of your life for so long and rolling that into a big organization. But before we get into that, Matt, every good founder has some war stories. So can I ask, what was it about being a founder for so long that kept you interested in that space and wanted to, why did you want to be a serial founder over and over again?
Yeah, I do believe in nature over nurture in most cases, and so I come from multiple generations of self-employed people or people that started their own firms. Going back to my great grandfather, literally. So I didn't have that. I didn't have that as a goal when I started my professional career. I actually focused on computer science and design, thinking that I was gonna go work for someone. I actually saw the stress that they had in their lives and said, I don't want that. I want to just, do great work for someone else to start. And that was my goal. But then I got that itch, read a bunch of Paul Graham articles back in 2004, this book called Hackers and Painters. So 22 years ago, it's hard to believe. And I got started thinking through, what's my thing? What's my idea? And a couple ideas gripped me, and they were all I would go to work, but it was all I could think about. It was just one of those things where I couldn't let go of the idea, and I became relentless to pursue it. So I think that was always that was how I got started. To answer your question about what kept me going, it's ridiculously hard, as you know. It is an exercise in really how much pain can you tolerate in terms of just the stress that you carry. So it's one of those things of, you don't climb Mount Everest for fun. You do it because it's there, as they said. And so you go through it. And what kept me going is people talk about burnout a lot. And I when I experienced burnout, I actually wrote an article called When to Quit. And I found it very difficult to answer that question. Sometimes people have like, well, when would you know when to quit? And I get that from family, from friends, from people who are working jobs elsewhere and having more success for me than me in the short term. And I really believe that burnout to me is actually it's your brain, your heart, your body's way of telling you that the path you're on is not fruitful, or it's not, the gold is no longer at the end of this rainbow. You should turn around. And so I was always willing to course correct along the way and kind of I prevented burnout by just being willing to just change direction constantly, saying like, this is a dead end, but I don't want to give up on the dream of being an entrepreneur. So let me do something slightly different, maybe 10 degrees this way, sometimes 50 degrees this way. And I think that willingness to change allowed me to postpone burnout for essentially 2 decades, which, yeah, that's that's key.
Now, we're going to be talking about unlearning some things, but I'm keen to know, Matt, before we get into that space, what are some things as a founder that you've, without a doubt, continued throughout your career and into your role at customer.io?
Yeah. Oh yeah, big lessons that I learned. One is that product velocity is governed by decision making, not by keystrokes. And I think we see that with AI, especially. Now keystrokes are obsolete. When I wrote that, when I had that thought 4 or 5 years ago, at my second startup, it was a little bit more. Yeah, you have to actually hit the keys. Now it's, well, you're typing the keys or prompts, but I still think that product velocity, yes, we can ship a lot more features, but things like end-to-end experience are still throttled by decision making and how quickly can we make decisions. That's not changed. I think that's the big advantage that startups obviously have, is that it's fewer chefs in the kitchen, it's fewer brains in the room that you have to go through to make that decision. It doesn't necessarily mean it's better quality, but you are faster. The other one that I like to share with folks is that I really believe that software is a performance art, not just an engine or a piece of hardware or something. It's what separates it is that it's a performance art. And I think you can look at something like music, a music performance, a theatrical performance, or even maybe like a culinary performance, if you will, as good analogs for software. And I think if you think of that, it actually can help you move through a lot of organizational design decisions, some of the things we're going to talk about today, better than if you treat it as a factory, right? And we know it's not a factory, but it's like, okay, what is it instead? I really think I think it's performance art.
Nice. We share a similar mindset. I often have spoken about loving the craft, and product
Yeah.
management is a craft. And I think that's during those hard days when it feels like it's all about politics and code and bugs and functional things,
Hmm.
reminding myself that this is a craft, like, as you say, an art form,
Yeah.
and remembering to fall in love with the craft, that the difficulties, the challenges, the prioritization calls, the decision making, they're
Yes.
features of the craft. They're not
Yes.
bugs to solve.
No,
They're
absolutely.
all part of that process.
Yeah.
Nice. So, Matt, let's go into then going from founder. Can I ask, was you a like cliche founder mode founder, where it was all about your decisions all of the time? Did you see that type of character come into your life throughout your career?
I I had to face that decision a few times. One of them was to kind of go back to the first startup and some of the decisions I made in, say, 2017, 2018, when we were actually looking to exit the company. We ended up bringing on actually a new CEO, which was a real test of that founder mode attitude of like, that's the biggest decision I think you can make as a founder. Because you are literally, you're giving up day-to-day control over your thing, over your baby, some might say. And that's scary, but I didn't find I learned to not find my identity in the title, the CEO title. I think that's a clue. I think the other clue about what I think of as founder mode is that when I started the company, it was really important for me to be the founding CEO of both startups, because I knew that the decision I was going to make, I was the only one that could make those and kind of get us on the right course. But once I got us on the right course in any area, whether it's technology, marketing, operations, finance, I was always really eager to delegate those, that like let go of those. Like the new test became, can I find someone, am I good enough recruiter to find someone that I can completely trust with this? Trust but verify, right? People still want coaching and accountability, but am I a good enough recruiter? So I was a big believer in, there's an investor, Fred Wilson, New York-based investor, and he had some great lines in the early 2000s, kind of Web 2.0 era. But one of them was the CEO's job is really simple. It's keep enough money in the bank to keep operations going, and then hire the next, recruit and hire and assemble the best team you can. And I really took that to heart. Like, I took immense pride in building the team. And I think if you don't take that immense pride in building the team, I think that's a different mode, but that's not what I was. So I was the best compliment I ever got when I was leaving my first startup was, kind of had this little bit of a moment where everybody was, end of the movie, kind of going your separate ways. And one of the best things that was said to me was, I was like, well, what, after 15 years of this, I asked somebody, like, well, what do you think I'm good at? Right? What's my thing? And he said to me, you're really good at assembling the best team possible for the thing that needs to be done. And so when it comes to founder mode, I think it's about your knowing what your superpower is, your self-awareness check. And for me, that stuck with me of, okay, I'm going to repeat that no matter where I go. That's my thing. And I really enjoy that the most. At some point you start to dwell on your strengths and not your weakness. There's always that thing, like, do I emphasize my strengths or do I try to fix my weaknesses? I think obviously you need both, but I'm more of a double down on my strengths at this point in my career.
No, that's why I applaud the fact you took the moment to ask that question and to capture that. Because if you hadn't asked the question, you wouldn't have had the learning and you wouldn't have been able to carry it with you. And I think for many founders, but for anyone, we're often so busy in the craft or in the work that we don't ask those types of questions, or we do it in a more formal way where it's then hard to genuinely absorb. So let's talk about you coming over into Customer.io. So where was Customer.io when you joined to help set the scene for what you had to unlearn as my next question?
Yeah. So the scene was, I was coming off the heels. So my first startup that I started, I had the idea in 2004, way back when. Exited in 2019, started another startup. 5 years looking for product market fit and finding little glimmers of it, but never really finding it. And so I got to experience both, both the finding it after a long time and then the never finding it despite your best efforts. Learned a lot from that. I decided I didn't want to do another startup, at least not 3 in a row. And so I said, who can I go work with that's doing something exciting and that already has product market fit? I didn't want to do 0 to 1 again. And so Customer.io is a company I'd been courting, getting to know, learning about through the product team that was there, through potentially a partnership or an integration with my second startup. And really loved the people that I talked to, thought they were clearly of good quality, high quality. And I knew Colin, the CEO, who I report to now, just through that kind of peripheral vision of founders to founders in the Twitter sphere or universe. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, could you use someone like my help, right? And I got a quick answer, which is sort of like we're always looking for more founder types to help us take it to the next level. And at the time, Customer.io, growing really fast. The public number we always like to use is 40% year over year plus or minus. So that's how quickly they were growing. And we were at that point, we were under 100 million a year in revenue, but I joined in late 2024. And so we surpassed that milestone in 2025, celebrated it in early 2026 and so forth. So it was, but I'll give you a sense of the scale, revenue aside, 200 and ballpark 275 employees when I joined. And it was, it was funny because joining a company of 275 people after coming from 2 startups, neither of which were near that scale. My biggest concern was that I was going to come in, and when you're at that scale and things are growing that fast, easy to assume that you kind of have everything figured out. And like, are my skills really useful here? Do you kind of have it all figured out already? It seems like a well-oiled machine that's growing, right? So it's almost like I don't want to break anything. Is there any work for me, or am I going to be, frankly, kind of bored, or maybe feeling underutilized and all of that? And so I took the leap anyway, believing that, hey, they said they could use folks like me. Let me figure out what they mean by that. And we're a fully remote distributed company. So it was 275 people with no headquarters per se. I mean, we obviously have a mailing address, but no building, no offices anywhere. And so I just kind of had to take out the flashlight and start exploring this network of people that work on this idea, which is what a company really is, this idea of Customer.io, like learning over the first few months what is figured? How does this thing work? Like it was fascinating.
Can I ask then, Matt, penetrating in those first 90 days, when you've come from 2 decades almost of founder
Yeah.
life, and then you're coming into this fully remote organization, and I appreciate in that context it's really hard to personally get to know people in those first
Yeah.
few weeks because it's all like this. What was some of those points where you were like, I've got to not do X, or I've got to not do Y, that I would have done over the last 20 years? What are some of those initial, just very natural, organic things where you recognize you need to suppress them either for a period of time or altogether, that you wouldn't have done if this was your third startup?
Yeah. I think the biggest one for me, so in important context, I was brought in actually on the engineering team initially, and really given the mandate, given my experience, and given the team I was working with, working directly with the CTO, to very deliberately and explicitly ask, don't worry about organizational walls or silos that we may have. Like we want you to truly cut across, look across the organization, talk to everybody in every department, and help us do X, and whatever X was, we don't want to be throttled by any past decisions or inertia that we have. So help us, this is all about continuing to grow as fast as we've been growing, right? So the thing you're fighting is that calcification or that crystallization of it's working, so let's lock it in, right? And this, the company, to their credit, was saying, we don't want to lock in the way we've done it up until now. We know that it's been good to us, but we need new, fresh perspective to look across the organization and not be constrained. So to answer your question, it's a little bit different in that I was asked to do that. Now, I will say, though, what I had to learn was there's a difference between exploration and curiosity, and then what I would have done in the founder mode, which is, okay, now I'm going to change this or fix this, right? And yes, curiosity, the good part, the part to keep was truly doing that root cause analysis that it becomes second nature, of understanding, why is this way? Why is it this way? Why is this way? But then realizing that to affect change, it was going to be a different ballgame, right? It was going to be a different playbook or way of going about affecting change. And it was going to be more of the, not giant organization, but not the 10 people in a room, 5 people in a room way of affecting, or where I'm the CEO affecting change. And I think that took a long time for me to figure out, but I think I started experiencing it first and foremost when I would engage with, I would say, sales and marketing, where it was so far, if you lay the organization out left to right, like I was starting out on one side, say, this is my left, but and then to get over here, okay, product marketing, go to market, sale. By the time I got to sales, it was like, okay, I'm just doing discovery here. I'm not here to change any of this. But let me start learning. Let me understand. Let me empathize better. But let me not put on the fixer hat right away and say oh, I see. I wouldn't do it that way. It's like, well, just be curious, right? That was a lesson, and I think I was okay with that because it was overwhelming anyway. It was like there was so much to learn at first in a remote distributed company of 20 plus countries, many time zones, 275 people, adding people at a rate where we crossed 300 soon thereafter that. We crossed 350 soon thereafter that. That it was not something that I could get my whole head around quickly anyway. But there was a little bit of that tendency or that urge to just be a little too quick to say, I've got it, right? And you have to just steepen it a little longer, right?
Can I ask, how did you prioritize that as a process? One of the benefits of being a founder of a startup is you're acquiring domain knowledge continuously over, in your instance, almost 2 decades. So you got a lot of knowledge about the people, the processes, the practices, the protocols, the governance. And so it's all been drip fed into you. But then when you're coming into an almost 300 person organization, you've got to absorb some of that, obviously in a very slow way. What did what did the prioritization process look like in your head? Did you start with meeting with product teams, with sales, with engineering? How did you prioritize sort of,
Yeah.
breaking all of the Lego set down into individual blocks so you could actually understand them?
Yeah. We obviously had the it was interesting because I did a couple podcasts when I was a founder where I interviewed founders of other companies, and my main question was how it works. I think there's a lot of I thought it would make a great coffee table book, is like, how does this organization actually take a customer order and turn it into a fulfilled product or whatever, follow the work. And so there's a bunch of different mental models. I mean, one of them is following the work from, on the sales side, they've got pipeline. On the marketing side, they've got demand gen, which turns into leads, which fills the top of the funnel. On the product side, there's prioritization. I think what was overwhelming at first is that it seemed that there were essentially multiple funnels throughout the organization, depending on where you looked. So like I said, if you look in sales, you see one funnel. If you look here, you see another. And I was very used to kind of drawing or having, as you said, that holistic systems thinking diagram in my head of, things go here, go here, go here. And that was fragmented, completely fragmented for me when I started. My go-to strategy for understanding how things work when you're in a overwhelming context, to use a very in vogue term, I love zeroing in on one practical corner of that, one practical application of that question, instead of staying in the theoretical. I think what I often tell new hires at Customer.io, like a hire product manager, is we hire systems thinkers because we want you to have that skill of understanding, okay, in general, this is the map, right? But we're not here to just do surveillance, right? We're here to have surveillance of the land or survey the land or have satellite pictures of the land. We're farmers, we're agriculturists. We're here to grow things. We're here to work with the land, right? We're on the land, right? So what I tell them is, look, you can learn about an environment in two ways. One is tops down and one is bottoms up. And if you take some satellite imagery of a certain area, and I actually worked in I learned a lot about mapping and agriculture at one point in my career, so this will make a little more sense. But you take a satellite picture of an area and say, oh, this is the land. It's very dry. It's very this. It's very that. And you have this whole analysis but then you drive out there and you actually take a walk, right? And you actually get down on your hands and knees and you work in the dirt and you try to grow something and you try to water something. You try to you will learn things about the land that you will never learn from the other direction, but it's going to feel so inefficient and so menial and so tedious for a while. You have to just wrestle with that and accept that, and it will make you into an expert. I think you will, if you stay at that high level in a new organization, it's very tempting, especially as a high level thinker, systems thinker. We read all the books, right? If you don't get down on your hands and knees and grow something and really get your hands dirty in the land, and that means at the individual, atomic, conversational Slack threads, follow the bouncing ball level, in a specific application, meaning a feature you're trying to ship, that you're trying to measure, that you're trying to get to customers, if you don't get all the way down into the minutest detail, your confidence that you really understand the system will be hindered. You'll never be able to speak with the same confidence of someone that says, I used to live there, right? Like, you're talking about a Wikipedia entry or a photo. I live there. I walk the streets. I know that area, right? When it comes to an organization, I think trust is built through intimate familiarity with an area of the organization, not from a fantastic bird's eye view, right? And yet, counterintuitively, we reward bird's eye views and maps and diagrams and pictures that convey that you have this incredible knowledge of how things work. I think that's really important, but only as a navigational aid. Once you have that, you have to zoom in on an area and establish your own expertise, that you know what goes on inside that box, right? You can't just label that box sales call. Have you listened to a Gong Call recording lately? Do you know what actually goes on those sales calls? Very important from a product management perspective, right? And so some of the first things I did is I went in a Gong and I set up alerts to say, if this gets mentioned, flag me. I want to listen, right? I want to join sales calls. I want to be, I call it an ethnographer, like the Jane Goodall approach. You have to live in the forest, right? You have to be in the land.
Right.
Once you do that, the amount of respect you get in an organization when you can say, oh, I was on that call with Sarah or Joe or whatever. I heard them say this, that, and the other thing. Whew, you can feel it in the room, right? People go, this person dwells among us, right? That's a very different trust building exercise than, well, it says right here that we're supposed to do, the sales calls this way. Are you following the process? This is what the process says. You don't understand, right, yet how it actually goes. And so I think that's what I did. So I had a very specific feature that I wanted to work on. I had, good leadership from that perspective of telling me, pick a feature. And then I just dove in headlong and I said, forget I did the wide thing, wide for wide's sake. Let me focus on, I'm trying to carry this idea from idea to production. Let me truly dig in at every step along the way. And then I can speak from experience. Now, it's still a very N of one experience, but that N of one experience carries a lot of weight with your coworkers in terms of, what it's like to ship here. You know what it's like to build here, right? Very important.
Okay, I'm going to stick with the agricultural theme here, Matt, for a moment, because my next question is around product taste, product quality, standards. When you've been a founder, you're able to, if I was to use the agricultural analogy, you've been producing your own wine for almost 20 years, and you know how you want your wine to taste. To go into then someone else's vineyard and produce wine for someone else, how do you either consume their standards and recalibrate yourself, or how do you bring in your own standards and get them to recalibrate? What does the tactics, the play, the mindset look like to do that in a way that is obviously sensitive to your point, the velocity of progress and decision making, but also whilst either reflecting on the existing standard or asking those around you to respect the new standards? What does that look like as an approach?
The company matters a lot. So I would say start with an understanding of what kind of company am I in. My first company was bootstrapped for a while, then it was VC funded, and then ended up being private equity owned. Very different companies in terms of the DNA, the culture, who gets to establish the taste. What environmental factors, including the market, are dictating our taste? Are we hell bent on being the fast follower of this market leader, and therefore our taste is all of our cues are going to come from that. So you really need to get your bearings in terms of what kind of company am I in. Now, Customer.io is the kind of company that was founder built and led, mostly fun. I would say bootstrapped and then fund strapped. So it took very little funding, and that meant and then when we finally did raise a meaningful round, it was. Let's just say our revenue at the time would have let us raise a lot more. So we are very efficient in terms of our use of capital. That actually matters when even what we're about to talk about in terms of product taste. People lament, oh, this product, this product that the taste or whatever. You can go to a web page and almost tell that it's like who calls the shots here. Like, this is no longer this compared to this. That's we're not crazy, right? It's real. You can tell. When you use a product, when you use a landing page, who's really the sommelier, who's really in charge, who owns the vineyard, does come through in the product and the landing pages of the product and the marketing side of the product and the brand of the product. We know this, but we don't always call it out, but it's true. So I think knowing what kind of company you're in is step one, so you don't make any errors, unforced errors or self-inflicted errors that you could make. Now, Customer.io, very founder-led, founder built, and founder, I want to say controlled, but that almost sounds wrong, but like founder led, like the founder's voice is what mattered still at Customer.io when I joined. And that, for all intents and purposes, is Colin when I joined. Now, I would say Colin has a very tight relationship with our CTO as well, Matthew Newhook. And so taste, the nucleus of taste was there, right? And if I was going to come to somebody else's vineyard and produce something that lived up to their standards, another very important thing to know is don't assume that the vineyard you walked onto, don't assume that the people that own it are necessarily completely in love with what's on the shelves today, right? You have to separate what's being made today and maybe what they hope for, what their aspirations are. So you are now a consultant mode for a while, if you will, of understanding, okay, so what matters is what the owner wants, what the founder wants. Everybody that owns stock in this company trusts this person, right, to establish the standards and set the bar on taste. Let me go find out what their idea of good is first. Truly jam with that, truly gel with that, get to the point where you understand, hey, we really like this part of our lineup. We really don't like this part. We love this part. We don't love this part. Do you understand their perspective? Because if you come in and you go, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing, as a founder, it is truly your choice. And it's like, you live and die by those choices. Let's be honest, as when you join another company, it is our company. You own a stake, hopefully. And that's how that, we're all in this together. But in terms of taste, something as subjective as taste, do yourself a favor, in order, what kind of company am I at? And then who, if it is a founder-led thing, whose taste is really the most important taste? And then can I really start to understand their palate, right? And what they appreciate. That's your calling card now. That's your executive chef has established the cuisine.
Nice.
Now I have to go make it right. I'm in service of them, right?
Brilliant, brilliant. With that theme, you've also got probably 20 to 50 internal meetings in the company going on every day. And as a founder, you can be in a lot of meetings every day with your internal teams when it's a small team, but at scale, you can't. So there's obviously decisions being made, to your point, at the bird's eye view around what it looks like from the top and the taste, but also down at the ground level, there's decisions being made. What mechanisms, what tactics, how do you stay in touch with the decisions that are being made around you, knowing that you're not the one making those decisions or being across all of them all of the time? How do you stay in touch with that? And how do you ensure that you can operate as a VP, knowing you're not in the room for every decision, but a lot of the time you could be accountable for some of those decisions regardless?
Yeah. That is the work, right? I think there's no easy path, overnight answer to that. Like you basically described how do you scale taste? How do you make sure that the judgment that people are applying is up to the standards that, the CEO, the founders, you have? And let's go back to what I just said. First, it doesn't matter if these decisions that are being made aren't in sync with me if I'm not in sync with the leadership above me. So start with that. You're only going to be as yes, it's good to be influential, but if you start influencing people in the wrong way, it's counterproductive, right? And so I think it's extremely important to make sure you establish that connection that I talked about first with whoever is above you. And then I told this to someone recently who is in more of a director role or a leadership role in product management. How confident are you that the person you report to, if it's not the CEO, is in tune and in sync with the CEO as well? So just something to keep in mind. Don't assume that every step along that ladder is airtight, right, or watertight. That's important. So if you have confidence in that, now we can proceed to what you just talked about, which is what else is happening. I think that I try to take on the role of director or choreographer, if you want to use that metaphor now, of I can't control every line that's read, every position, everything that's going on a set. What can I do though? I am a big believer in all of the intangibles as air cover. So in terms of where you can't be, what travels beyond you? What travels beyond you is the teaching that you provide, the mentorship, therefore, that you provide. So teaching and mentorship, that scales. What else scales is the people you choose to hire. and how teachable they are, right? So are the people you're hiring the kind that are willing to hear you say something, provide a little direction, say, you should, you know, this should be a little sharper. This should be a little bit, we should underemphasize it. And then how do they respond? The people you choose in a leadership position is, I've said this line, and I'll say it again here. Eventually, your team's performance is your performance. So your team is you in that sense, in a very real way. That's how you're going to be evaluated. So it's really important to not separate yourself from your team in the sense of what they're doing, what they're deciding, what's going on is ultimately how you're going to be judged. And I think that lights a certain urgency within us as leaders to say, I can't possibly be in every room, but I can teach and I can mentor and I can influence the palates or the tastes or the decision-making of everyone around me. That's scalable. And that now I need to check. I need to walk around and I need to taste everything and weigh in on it, critique it, provide that constructive feedback, and separate the creation from the creator. We're not blaming people. We really aren't. Like I like to tell my team, I love to hate the things I love, right? And I will tear apart my own creations because I want them to be better. And if you hear me do that, please don't think it's an indictment of you or anything else. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about, what does the customer deserve? And is this good enough for the customer? Is this good enough for us? And those are all the intangibles. Here's the vexing part. The intangibles scale. So if you are not devoted to the intangibles, you'll fail. And I think I will say that there seems to be a bit of a countercurrent right now in product management and design culture, which is cut off your one-on-ones, don't meet with people as much. That's not what's important. What's important is just getting your hands, when they say getting your hands dirty, they mean shipping things and PRs and code. That to me is only as important as building empathy with your actual reports and understanding how their lives are and how it goes, not the output of your actual efforts in a direct, tangible sense. I will never open enough PRs and ship enough things or provide enough design criticism to move the needle here. I do that to provide an example and to teach, which does scale, right? And I think that's the proper backlash to being disconnected, is that, yes, by getting in there and truly doing it yourself, you now understand how to teach better and how to scale yourself better. It's not to have a direct impact through the work you're doing, right? I think that's a misconception. And I think if you do that, you actually become isolated. Like, I will be a more effective IC as a leader if I just kind of cut myself off from my team and just focus on my work, right? But I think that's a very dangerous game.
Well, let's lean into that a little bit more, Matt. Obviously, you've implemented AI at Customer IO with your product teams to scale product at Customer IO.
Yeah.
How did you decide where AI should empower your team and what calls to make on implementation of that versus where it might create noise or risk, or it's just another tool or more tools, but not necessarily making a move on, bringing it back to founder worries, the financials, for instance, of the company?
Yeah.
How did you bring AI in a way that helps you and your team make better choices that ultimately should be affecting financials?
Yeah, I obviously there's the engineering side, and I think in terms of AI adoption, our engineering team is world class in terms of percentiles. You can look, we've run the numbers and looked at benchmarks. Heavy use of AI in terms of writing code, reviewing code, and I won't even, it'll be an injustice if I try to say more than that, but just engineering velocity is incredible at Customer IO. It's actually one of the things people comment on when they join the team is, can't believe, some people will say, I've never been in an organization where engineering wasn't the bottleneck. It's truly not. Now, that's fantastic. What I think on the product and design side, what I've told the teams is, we're looking for AI to scale processes that humans could do. But the kind of work that we're looking to apply AI towards is, first and foremost, it's things like scanners within Slack. It's things like loose ends. It's following up with things. It's all the overwhelmedness that you struggle with in terms of inboxes and messages and all that. So we know this, right? It's the, how do we possibly take this fire hose and make it manageable? That's pretty obvious. Where I think it's less obvious and requires truly one at a time at the moment, truly one at a time evaluation is, and I just recorded a podcast about how I use AI to do more thought leadership kind of work as a VP. I think that's its own animal and requires a lot of iterations and a lot of work and a lot of wrestling with the artifact. What I told the team is product managers and designers, but especially product managers, I think designers code more. The primary inputs and outputs of product managers are you're listening and you're outputting recommendations, navigational recommendations about which direction should we go and how far should we go in that direction and why. What will we learn, right? What will we gain? The artifacts we choose to create, you can lay those along a spectrum of the kind that create trust and the kind that erode trust. There is a true risk that you as a product manager adopt AI in a way that actively erodes confidence in your own output because you've delegated way too much to AI in a way that's not helpful. We also know this, but I told the team to make this real. Use AI as much as you want. Anything that has your name on it is yours. You are fully responsible for it. So if you want to use AI to draft that entire recommendation about what we should work on next and share that with the C team or share that with the leadership team and put your name on it, that's fine. But your name is on it. And I'm not going to distinguish, oh, this part was Claude, this part was you. So, I'm not going to really knock you for this hallucination here or this inaccuracy. No, that's still you. And I think that puts a real accountability check on, I don't want to tell you how much to use AI. And I don't want to decide for you. I want you to use it as much as helps you do your job, but I'm going to evaluate the quality of your work independent of your AI usage. And if that means you can create something amazing using it for 99% of the document, great. Maybe we didn't really need a human to do much of that work. But if you use AI to communicate things and I read it and I go, I've read this twice and I still don't understand what this is saying, or this seems off base, that's also on you. And that lets me then delegate, again, the usage of AI sort of in the day-to-day work and say, it's a tool, use it as much. Now I can share lessons and what they've learned by doing that. But I think as a leader, enforcing those standards and enforcing accountability and saying, your name is the only one on the line when you use an AI tool. No different than shipping code to production that AI generated. You're responsible for the bugs. You're responsible for the maintenance. You're responsible for the quality of that work. It's no different in product management.
Nice. I think the point that people miss is engineering. We have the pull request function to get that critique from others before we go and put something out there to the world.
Yeah.
In product management, on the business side of it, producing a presentation, it's easy to spin out the presentation and put it out to the world without the PR level critique from your peers. And by skipping that step, it's where the slop ends up in public, etc. And I think there will be this point in time when we all look back and see a little bit of damage done to our individual professional brands because we used AI for a presentation here and we didn't quite check it out properly before we presented it to the board and those types of things that people still need to be careful around. And yes, that's hard work. And yes, that's hard thinking. But it's also what's going to elevate your professional identity.
Agreed. I'll share one cultural bit that might be helpful. Before AI, when we talked about, not working in public, but like in Slack, do you have more private channels or more public channels? And when you produce something, where do you ship that to? Once you have this ability to, if you don't have PRs for knowledge work and you do all of your work publicly, meaning I'm just going to share this into the open channel, you are now fast tracking that exposure of this slop is now launched out into this channel where there's 78 people in it. And that can be very, that can backfire, or that can be, it depends on obviously the risk, but the risk might just be, it looks bad. Installing those PRs, if you will, or those quality checks, not totally hidden or behind the scenes, but like it's new plumbing, right? It might be a new step of like, we didn't used to have this extra kind of, like you said, review step. Well, that's true, but that's because you spent 6 hours on it instead of 6 minutes on it, right? And so I think it's important to put good things in front of our peers if it's meant for general consumption, because in a remote organization moving very quickly, different people have different amounts of time to suspend disbelief, or to maybe say like, oh, I understand that was a slop draft. It's like, well, do we really need to be just sending slop drafts out there to a channel with 78 people in them with no sort of preface or warning, right? Not productive. So yes, I understand you can create the first version in 6 minutes, but let's still take the time that we used to make it better. It's a worthwhile endeavor.
And I think that comes back to that modeling from a leadership perspective at the top. If the top is pulling out those things, then other people will see that as the new standard. And keep yourself in check throughout. Matt, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's been a privilege to be able to talk about product management as a craft again, which is really how I see it, with the warts and all, and the challenges and the difficulties. And I really appreciate you bringing some of those war stories in of how your founder experience has shaped your product experience. But before I say goodbye to you, Matt, can I ask, what advice would you give to people going in the other direction? And the reason I ask that is a lot of layoffs right now in product management, but also the barrier to entry to build is in some ways never been easier or possibly cheaper, depending on what you're doing with your tokens. But for those that want to go in the other direction, now you've been through it in one direction, what would you recommend to them, anyone who's sitting in a VP seat thinking to go into founder mode and go to themselves, that they should be mindful of in this specific AI era?
Yeah, I think two things, and they're equally difficult challenges. Does the product create the value that you hope it creates? I think you owe it to yourself to have someone that is extremely close to you, meaning could be a family member, could be a best friend, someone that's a text message away and responds in hours at least, not days, to whatever you put out there that you can iterate with, because you can go through these loops so quickly with AI. But you have to have someone that's not yourself using the earliest version of whatever it is to give you that honest feedback on whatever it is. And those need to be very fast, tight loops. So I just shipped an update today, tonight, whatever it is. Can you take a look? They look at it, they try it, they give you that feedback. You must have a sort of a partner or a pair there. That used to be a co-founder. I think that was the role there. I think more and more people are able with AI to ship something solo, but don't let that be solo. Don't be alone. Don't be isolated. Have that person that's also using that app or product with you and can give you, real-time feedback as much as possible. The other part is distribution is still the final boss. It's the mega Bowser of trying to get to product market fit, and it's actually harder and worse than ever. Distribution is often misunderstood as a mailing list or a website. That is not distribution. That is presence. That's nice to have. Distribution is the ability to get an audience's attention at will. Very, very few people have that ability. And by at will, I mean Apple has distribution. When they launch a new thing and they can just put a little coming soon at the top of apple.com and instantly 1 million people learn about their new product, that's distribution. You don't have it when you start out. You need to start thinking from day one, how do I solve my distribution problem? There's a really good book by Andrew Chen on this topic called The Cold Start Problem. That's more for like marketplaces and B2C, which a lot of people are. But I think the level of challenge that he describes with B2C distribution, it might as well be true in B2B these days. I think it's just as difficult to bootstrap something to get it to traction. And you will most likely die before you ever have your first paying customer or your first 100 users. So please, please, please focus on distribution, which means you can get people's attention at will. And I have a million more things to say about that, but I would say those are the two giants.
Amazing. What a great place to finish on. Matt, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your thoughts, perspectives. It's been fantastic to learn from you.
Thank you so much, Jay.
To everyone listening in, thank you also for joining Matt and I today for this conversation of going from a founder to a VP in product. If you'd like to learn more about Customer.io, head over to customer.io, or for Product Coalition over at productcoalition.com. Until next time, thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Product Coalition podcast, hosted by Jay Stansel. Got questions or want to explore more topics? Connect with Jay on LinkedIn or join the ever-growing Product Coalition community on Substack. Thanks for listening.